Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour presented by Picasso's Pizza and the Cover One Sports Network. And Dave, as we kick things off this evening, again, Brandon Beane, I don't want to say friend of the pod because he's never been on the pod, but I do feel like Brandon Beane is in some way, shape, or form a supporter of this podcast in the fact that he always gives us something to talk about. He's always making moves on a Monday morning. I don't know, maybe he's one of those type A guys. He likes to get to work Monday morning and just get right to it. But he signed Latavius Murray this morning, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But I wanted to start with our initial thoughts on the draft class. And I gave some sort of like maybe superlatives that we were going to walk through here at the top of the show before we sort of talk about Latavius Murray and reconstruct the roster. And we were going to start with favorite pick, but we have a super chat here that I'm going to pull up in a moment from Justin Tyndall, a very generous super chat. So we're going to start with maybe the most disappointing pick of the draft class. And I hate to say that because I like all of the players individually, and we'll get to that in a second, but here is Justin's super chat. He says, Beane said Williams is a backup to Milano and a four-phase special teamer. Didn't he say the exact same thing about Bernard last year? How are they both going to see the field during their rookie deals being third-round picks? So I want to know if you maybe echo my sentiment that this might have been, despite the fact that I think we both like the player, the most disappointing Buffalo Bills draft pick, just from the aspect of I don't know how long it's going to be before he sees the field on defense, and knowing the perceived need that we have at this position next to Matt Milano.
Yeah. And I mean, I said as much really during the live coverage, right? This happened during our live coverage with Pro Ant. I did make him though that I did like Dorian Williams as a prospect more in parallel than I did like Terrell Bernard last year, getting picked in the same round, same position. I do like Dorian Williams a little bit more as a prospect than I did Terrell Bernard. Now, with that said, it is a little odd. Again, in the third round, we find ourselves drafting a player in which we, at least on paper, already have a few guys like this, Milano, Bernard, that kind of fit into this sort of archetype. Now, I know Williams has like a long wingspan and there's certain things about his game that are a little bit different. However, much like we kind of diagnosed the pick last year, Terrell Bernard in the third round, I kind of was doing the same a bit this year with guys like Wanya Morris and other tackles that obviously you knew I liked Wanya, and there were others still on the board that I would have gone after. And as we get into the discussion tonight, what positions on this roster still really look like they could use an upgrade, that's where I'm going to get to, right? And so while I do like the player and I do like him more as more potential than even maybe Bernard, even a year behind, not necessarily this year, but overall as a prospect coming out, it is still a little bit of a head scratcher to me. And I wonder if that run on players sort of right before the Williams pick with Overshone and a couple of the other linebackers, Henley, I can never say his name right. The guy you like, Diane Henley, and it kind of felt it felt off to me. It just felt off to me. So
you saw Henley come off the board, you saw Simpson come off the board, and then the pick before the Bills. Maybe the Dallas Cowboys got their vengeance over Dalton Kincaid. DeMarvion Overshone goes off the board. And then all of a sudden, just like that, it is Williams going to the Buffalo Bills. So maybe there was a panic. Maybe they saw a cliff. But if you look at Williams, Beane, I think, threw a lot of people off after Friday night with his commentary. Because according to Brandon Beane, he's like, yeah, this guy's going to really struggle picking up a more complex scheme than what he ran in college. It was very vanilla. It was very basic. He's going to start at outside linebacker. He's going to be a special teams player. He might go a full year before he starts to maybe even consider working him in the middle. But then over the course of the weekend, he started to walk those comments back, and Sean McDermott started to echo a different sentiment as well. talking about his long wingspan, talking about how he'll have a shot in the middle. But if you really want to sort of put all of the tea leaves together, it doesn't seem like the Buffalo Bills are very optimistic, at least in year one, that Dorian Williams is going to be the answer at Mike linebacker. Now, Brandon Bean, I think, made a great comment. He said Dorian Williams isn't small. He's just small compared to a guy like Tremaine Edmonds. And maybe we as fans need to stop comparing every single linebacker that we want the Buffalo Bills to play Mike with Tremaine Edmonds, because that's a high bar to try to clear when talking about finding sort of the archetype or the body composition of your middle linebacker. But it appears for now like the competition's going to be a short arm Terrell Bernard, a Tyrell Dotson who struggled in coverage and was benched after one game last year, and AJ Klein, who is getting up there in years. And then you can also throw Baylon Spector in that mix as well. So that's what's so disappointing about it, just because you mentioned Wanya Morris. He was on the board. He's somebody that could have been
and one pick later, right?
One pick later. Maybe
Yeah.
the Bills see him as a guard, so maybe that played a role in it. You had Jordan Battle go a couple of picks later. He's somebody we could have talked about in the safety conversation starting next season, but who knows? Maybe after Bean's comments the last couple of days, McDermott's comments, maybe Dorian Williams will get some run at middle linebacker next year. It's not as far down the road as we thought. My guy, Broderick Martin, went before the end of the third round. He's a guy I could have seen behind Daquan Jones and then replacing Daquan Jones. Your guy, Ricky Stromberg, who could have maybe succeeded Mitch Morse at center, Siaki Ika, Adebawariye, DeJuan Jones, John Gaines. They all went like within the 20-30 picks after Dorian Williams. I think those are all guys that we liked more than DeJuan Williams. But at the end of the day, that doesn't take away from the fact that Dorian Williams is an exciting prospect. He does have those long arms. He does fly sideline to sideline. And who knows, just because we have to be patient doesn't mean that this pick can't pay off next year or maybe possibly the year after.
I mean, and it's an unfair. It's kind of unfair to anyone coming in, right? Because Tremaine Edmonds is an absolute anomaly from a physical attribute standpoint. The size with the speed that he possesses. There's a reason he was he was the 16th pick, if I recall correctly, in the draft. And it's not like he was the 16th pick Mike linebacker in 1985, right? Like, this is like a fairly recent draft, 2018, where at that point the NFL had already kind of been evolved into that sort of new, it's a passing league, that thumper Mike linebackers, kind of like traditional Mike linebackers aren't necessarily what people are after. And he still went in the top 20 of that draft, and the Bills traded up for him. So like it's a bit unfair, right? That guy was a first round pick who the Bills traded up for, who is a physical freak of nature. And there's a reason he's getting paid the money he's getting paid, whether you liked him or not, and whether you thought he was great or not. He's probably better than the haters made him out to be. And he probably maybe wasn't super elite, as a lot of maybe people thought he was like the best thing ever, but like he was still very, very, very good. Right. And it's very hard to replace that. And so, yeah, I think it's tough, right, to kind of fill those shoes. It's like on Moneyball, right, when they try to fill in Jason Giambi with Scott Hatterberg, right? So it's like, I mean, he can get on base. Like maybe Williams can do some things, but we'll need some patience, I think, with him.
Buffalo Fan 64 comes into the super chat. Always appreciate the super chatters out there. And he says, you think since the Bills invested another third round pick in a linebacker, we could maybe start seeing more three linebackers on the field? I personally do not think so, just mostly for the fact that I think the Buffalo Bills believe that Teron Johnson is one of their 11th best players, and I don't think the Buffalo Bills want to take Teron Johnson off the field. That being said, the Buffalo Bills do have a young nucleus of linebackers that they've invested heavily in. Matt Milano, who they have paid and who is an all-pro. Terrell Bernard, who they spend a 3rd round pick on, and now Dorian Williams here, who they spend a 3rd round pick on. So again, linebacker is so vital to what Sean McDermott wants to do. Maybe it becomes less vital now that he's taken over play calling. They've let Trey Edmonds walk. We'll talk a little bit later on the show about maybe some scheme changes we could be seeing for the Buffalo Bills. But as important as the linebacker position is, when one guy goes down, you want to make sure there's a guy behind him because of just how important, maybe more important than other teams' linebacker is to the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, and I think like you also gotta maybe throw Taylor Rapp into the conversation there too as well when you start talking about like personnel and like 3 linebackers on the field. Like I just, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would be, I think if you start seeing that as the predominant personnel, I would be surprised.
Yeah. Chris Jenkins comes in and says, Judge is sounding usually mellow tonight. I wonder if fatherhood has mellowed him out. You know what mellowed me out? The fact that like Brandon Beane had a draft that like for the most part I agreed with for the first time in a while. That usually helps mellow me out. So let's continue talking about this draft class, just sort of our initial thoughts or sort of maybe our wrapping up type of thoughts before we reconstruct this roster and talk about Latavius Murray. What was your favorite pick? Like, what was the pick that was just like, you're just like, dang, this is it. This is the one. This one just sticks out more than the rest.
I mean, obviously Kincaid was a great pick, and I love the pick, but like that's kind of easy. I think Torrance was my favorite pick. I think Osiris was my favorite pick. I think there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, I think that the value they got for where they picked him was incredible, right? I think that he could have easily been a 1st round player. Obviously, guards aren't quite valued as highly as tackles when it comes to the draft, but you've still seen in recent years some guards go in the 1st round, like Zion Johnson, etc. And he fell all the way to the end of the 2nd round. Arguably the best guard in the class. And so that's one reason. The second reason I think that I really like this pick is because obviously he came in on a top 30 visit. So the Bills were familiar with him. They got a chance to kind of know him pretty well. So they knew what they were getting when they picked it, but also maybe it signals a little bit of evolution as well and kind of what the Bills were going for. And then as you kind of see where they went with the rest of the draft and guys like Shorter, like they certainly, at least by the way they drafted, made it seem like they were wanting to be trying to paint a more physical brand of football this year in 2023. So we've always kind of had these archetype conversations about Bills being like more of this athletic sort of, hate to use the word, finesse type offensive line. And Torrance kind of goes the opposite of that, which is exciting to me because it shows the Bills may be willing to change and adapt and do some new things on the offense, going with a little bit more power, perhaps, and size, which I find exciting because it shows me they're willing to adapt and change. So for me, I think Torrance was my favorite pick.
Yeah, I mean, who's a guy that Aaron Cromer had the last time he was with the Buffalo Bills under Rex Ryan? Richie Incognito, sort of a tone setter on the offensive line. And we talk about wanting to fix the run game. This is how you go about fixing the run game, is putting wedging a guy like Osiris Torrance in between Mitch Morse and Spencer Brown. That is how you go about just snap of a finger, re-energizing and adding to and helping out and establishing your running game. And that's my pick as well for favorite pick, not just because of where he was and how we got him, but think back to February when we were covering the Senior Bowl. First of all, Osiris Torrance was the first player, him and Jamie Robinson were the first 2 players I created any draft content on. He was a guy that I had my eyes on all college football season. And then on top of that, we walked out of the Senior Bowl, Dave, and there were 3 prospects that the 3 of us, we couldn't let go of. They ended up being our no matter what players at tackle, guard, and center. And that was Darnell Wright, that was Osiris Torrance, and that was John Michael Schmitz. Yep. And I went back and I watched that show from February, and I asked you a question. I said, Dave, you have a choice. Osiris Torrance, John Michael Schmitz. Who are you going with? And you said, listen, and this is back when we didn't even have Connor McGovern. We didn't have David Edwards, right? There were still questions about Mitch Morse that hadn't been settled yet. You're like, still Osiris. It's Osiris over John Michael Schmitz every single time. And I agreed with that sentiment. So this has been our dude since the beginning of this process, and it
Thank you
hasn't
for reminding me
wavered.
of that too, by the way. Thank you.
And the Bills pulled the trigger. So how can this not be? How can this not be our favorite pick? We'd be hypocrites, I think, if we were to pick somebody else here in this situation. And then just sort of our final wrap up, and we'll talk about all these prospects again as we reconstruct the roster. At the beginning of the offseason, we deconstructed the roster. What do we need going into free agency, going into the draft? Now we're putting our roster back together, talking about what each position group looks like. Where can we maybe go out and try to find a street free agent? And how is this Buffalo Bills football team going to look on the field, even though it's a disturbingly long amount of time away from them actually playing some games? But last sort of little superlative here. Who is your biggest sleeper in this draft class?
Biggest sleeper. I mean, it's hard not to say Shorter, just given what we saw on some of the clips that Eric and those guys put out, and just the size. Like, the Bills really like Florida, by the way. There's some of their one of their UDFAs was in Florida as well. But I mean, how do you not pick Justin Shorter, right? Like, I mean, I feel like that's the guy that potentially could be an additional downfield type of threat. We know like what his strengths are, right? It's high pointing the ball, strength at point of catch, getting vertical with his routes. He's like not the most like refined route runner, but that's okay, right? That's not necessarily what the Bills need for that particular position. So it's easy to say Shorter, but part of me wants to say Nick Broker just because I had like put him on my no matter what list as well. I think people are maybe sleeping on him a bit because of the short arms, but I think Nick Broker could be a pretty valuable piece to the depth of this offensive line, especially with how we reconstruct this roster. In my personal preference now, with how things are shaking up, like I'd like to see them have 10 offensive linemen on the 53, and he would obviously be one of them. So, yeah, think those two guys probably.
Yeah, Chris Jenke comes in and says, Justin Shorter was my favorite pick of the draft. He's great on special teams too. Yeah, Shorter was my pick for sort of biggest sleeper because and again, this is something that if you look back at the Buffalo Bills and their draft picks under Brandon Beane, a lot of these guys fit this sort of type, highly sought after recruit out of high school, because Nick Broker was one of those as well. So whether it was Nick Broker, whether it's Justin Shorter, really high profile high school recruits, sort of had a weird path to get to the draft. A lot of people thought he was overdrafted, but when you look at those physical intangibles that you talked about, that alpha X receiver of body, does a lot of the things that maybe that the Buffalo Bills like Gabriel Davis to do, and you don't know what's going to go on with Gabriel Davis's contract situation. As Eric K chimes in the comment section, Davis insurance possibly. And then that last part that Chris Jenke hit on special teams, the Buffalo Bills have added 2 players to the wide receiver room this year. 3 if you count UDFA Tyrell Shrivers. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Shavers.
I don't know his name. Shavers, excuse me. Gunners. Trent Sherfield, gunner. Justin Shorter, 4-phase special teamer, gunner. Tyrell Shavers, gunner. Like, they're all guys who can gun on special teams. We no longer have Taiwan Jones. So we don't have to, despite the fact that we signed Latavius Murray today, we don't have to carry 4 running backs anymore. We can go into a game with not 5, but 6 wide receivers on the active roster. And I think Chris Jenke just echoed that in the comment section. Because Sherfield, because Shorter have the ability to gun, they're sort of not just a receiver who can be an option in the passing game. They're also a replacement for Taiwan Jones. And those things matter when the NFL inexplicably forces you to go from 53 guys to 48 guys on game day. One of the stupider rules that if I was in charge of the NFL, I would get rid of, because it drives me absolutely wild. And RJ Melville comes in and says the gunner competition is going to be legit. And it's going to be something to keep an eye on.
Hey, you're finally getting what you asked for, right? Like, you're getting the not a wasted roster spot on the 4th running back. Potentially you're getting not having to have the conversation of having the 7th wide receiver, just to have somebody who can do kick and punt return, because that's now covered in the running back room with Nyheim Hines. Right. So like the way it's kind of shifting, right? Optimizing the roster spots.
Now I just need Baylon Spector, Dorian Williams, Tyrell Dodson, and Terrell Bernard to do enough on special teams to also excise Tyler Manikevich from the roster. If that can happen, that would be wonderful. Maybe Sherfield and Shorter can do enough as gunners to maybe get the Buffalo Bills, even though it's not going to happen because of the money they've invested in him and how much they love him and the fact that he is one of the better ones in the NFL at doing it. Siran Neal literally can't play defense. Every time he plays defense, he is a liability, but he's one of the best gunners, if not the best gunner in the National Football League. So, yeah, that's going to be tough, but I would love it because those are sort of the stragglers as sort of those sort of special teams niche players that take up a roster spot that's on a 53-man roster, not frustrating. On a 48-man roster and a guy gets hurt, frustrating. Like that's why I don't like the NFL rule and I want to change it. But all right, like I said, the whole point of today's show, after giving our sort of wrap up of the NFL draft, was to reconstruct the roster for the Buffalo Bills. And we're going to go position by position today, putting the roster back together. And we're going to start with running back because the Buffalo Bills, they didn't draft a running back, but they gave Latavius Murray, according to Brandon Beane, a phone call in the middle of the draft on Saturday. And they said, hey, Latavius, we're extending you an offer. Do you take it or will you not take it? Because if you don't take it, we're going to draft a running back at some point. We promise we won't if you sign this deal. And Latavius Murray said, sign me up. And he was in One Bills Drive on Monday to sign this contract. 6'3", 230 pounds, 33 years old, but he showed he still got it in Denver last season. 688 yards in 2022. That's 4.3 yards per carry, 406 yards after contact per PFF. That's something you like to see. And he had 14 10-plus yard runs in his 12 games played. So what are your thoughts on the signing of Latavius Murray here?
I mean, you summed it up, I think, perfectly on social media, right? He's like the Duke Johnson signing of this year, obviously, but the type of signing it is akin to that. I really like Latavius Murray. We talked about him on our free agency show. You've been talking about him for weeks and weeks. As you guys know, my best friend's a Broncos fan, big Latavius Murray fan. When he came over there, the Broncos couldn't figure out that running back situation last year with Javonte out. Obviously, they went and traded for Chase Edmonds. He didn't do much. They brought in Latavius. He was really the best running back on that team last year. And I think that he showed on a bad Denver Broncos team that he could still get it done on a team. I mean, that I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but the Broncos had to be one of the lowest third down conversion teams, probably lowest time of possession teams in the league last year. And he still ran for almost 700 yards on that in the 3 carries. So I like what Latavius Murray brings to the group because you've got James Cook, you've got Nyheim Hines as kind of your, they're more of the speedier pass catching type backs. You brought in Damian Harris to be kind of that, I would say, do it all type, not necessarily the pass catching. Latavius Murray, I mean, he is the guy that will have the nose for the goal line, and he can still, he can still run away from guys from time to time. I really like his game. He runs very upright. I always thought of his style as kind of he reminded me a bit of a watered down Adrian Peterson, the way he ran. And that's a compliment to Latavius Murray, right? Obviously AP was incredible and is going to be a Hall of Famer, but Latavius' running style reminded me of AP, and I really liked that style, that upright running style that he brought, because it was just different and he got the most out of it. And that's a guy who made a really good career for himself. He finally got his chance in with theirs when he first broke out, and then kind of parlayed that into the career he's had now. So I think it makes for a very interesting conversation come camp, whether he or Damian Harris ends up with that last running back spot. Will be interesting.
Yeah, I put in my show notes here that I think there are 3 outcomes that are really possible here. The likeliest is, as you mentioned, as I mentioned on social media today, he's this year's Duke Johnson. He comes into training camp. He's a veteran. He's a break glass in case of emergency type of guy, where he ends up getting cut late August, but re-signed to the practice squad. And if somebody goes down, you have a veteran running back on your practice squad who is just ready at any minute, ready to go. I think the second outcome you could see here is that the Buffalo Bills genuinely want sort of that big skill set, that 6'3", 225 pound. We talk about all his yards after contact last year, and he makes the team as the 4th running back, and he's sort of matchup dependent. Maybe Some weeks he's active, some weeks he's inactive, depending on what the Buffalo Bills want to do on offense. And then I think the third outcome would be that he legitimately comes in and he impresses the coaches in training camp to the point that he steals Damian Harris's job, right? Like Damian Harris is only here on a 1-year deal. He's not guaranteed a roster spot. If the Buffalo Bills would have fallen in love with a running back in this draft, like Zach Charbonnet or Roshan Johnson, or if Bijan would have been on the board at pick 27, if any of those things would have happened, the Buffalo Bills could have easily drafted those guys. Those guys would have came in and they would have taken Damian Harris's roster spot. It was a 1-year deal. When the musical chairs, when the music stopped in the game of musical chairs, Damian Harris was without a home. That's why he had to come to Buffalo on this deal. So while we like Damian Harris, while we feel the Buffalo Bills got a bargain because of just all of the running backs that were available this year, either via the draft or via free agency, we took advantage of that. At the end of the day, like he's got to fight every single day in training camp, which is going to make this football team better for his job, because Latavius Murray could steal it. All right. Looking at the Buffalo Bills roster here, I sort of partitioned it this way too. Like James Cook is, in my opinion, going to be the lead back this year. James Cook and Nyheim Hines' job, they are safe this year. Damian Harris, Latavius Murray, they're sort of like on the fence. They both could make it. One of the two could make it. And then the Buffalo Bills added Jordan Mims in the undrafted free agent market as well, out of Fresno State. He's sort of this year's Raheem Blackshear. And if he has a Raheem Blackshear type training camp, I don't think Latavius Murray or Damian Harris's contracts preclude the Buffalo Bills from not keeping Jordan Mills. They have that flexibility this year that maybe they didn't feel like they had last year with Raheem Blackshear, and they ended up losing Raheem Blackshear to the Carolina Panthers. But I'm here for a James Cook bell cow 2023 season. How about you?
I'd like to see that, right? I'd like to see Cook getting 15 touches a game. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, for me, a bell cow definition in the Bills offense is maybe different than a bell cow definition in another offense. I don't think it's going to be like a Christian McCaffrey with the Niners situation where he's getting 20, 25 touches. But I think if you're a bell cow in this Bills offense, that's 15 touches minimum a game. I'm talking double-digit rushing attempts, 12 to 15, on a high volume day with another, 4 to 6 targets out of the backfield. That's the most I think bell cow you're going to get out of a Bills offense, and I think that's fine. Like I would like for that to be the case with James Cook, because to be honest, like he showed last year down the stretch that he could run between the tackles. Now, was counted goal line? Like no, probably not. But between the 20s and even in the red zone inside the 20, like maybe not necessarily at the goal line, he can run the tackles, and he's got a nose for it now after gaining that confidence towards the end of last year. So I think last year's performance from Cook down the stretch, after he was pretty much non-existent up until the bye week and in that Packers game where really things started turning for him, is going to give him a lot of confidence going into this year. And also, by the way, there's still not necessarily a huge amount of pressure on him to be a bell cow, because the Bills do have these other guys in the room like Hines and Harris. So like they're not throwing it all on James Cook, like anecdotally, right? Like they are still giving themselves options when it comes to camp and practice. So if he runs away and takes the job, so to speak, and proves that he should be getting 70+% of the touches, like cool. But if not, like no big deal. I mean, that would be great. But I'm really liking the way this running back room's shaping up, to be honest. So I'm happy with where it's at.
Yeah, I look at James Cook. He averaged 6.5 touches a game in 2022, and we got to at least double that heading into 2023 to give him, as you mentioned, right in that sort of maybe 15 touch a game range. He had 89 rushes last year, 5.7 yards per carry. It would have been one of the highest in the league, but he did not qualify because he didn't get enough runs to sort of qualify in that statistic. 21 catches. Devin Singletary had 38. You combine that, it gets you into that 60-ish catch territory, which I think an explosive playmaker like James Cook with the ball in his hands, that's a pretty dangerous number, and some big plays can come out of that. You have James Cook and his explosive playmaking ability, hopefully going to get more volume. Then as we've talked about, Damian Harris and Latavius Murray, they add a legit changeup to what James Cook and Nyheim Hines, we're going to talk about in a second, offer you. Maybe a changeup that we didn't have last year. We now have Osiris Torrance at right guard who can maul you. As much as we want to talk about Spencer Brown, the pass blocker, Spencer Brown can maul you in the run game. We've now freed up Ryan Bates to be this year's Bobby Hart. He can be sort of like a third tight end. You can get Reggie Gilliam on the field now. You have Dalton Kincaid, another tight end. The Buffalo Bills could legit, whether it's weather dictating it, whether it's needing to control the clock dictating it, I think the Buffalo Bills could be a lot more successful this year, sort of being that old school running the football type of team. Like they have, I think, the pieces to be more versatile on offense. I always talked about Tom Brady's first year in Tampa Bay. I was so just in awe of how they could be 4 or 5 receiver spread on one play, and then the next play be running it down your throat in 13 personnel. Like they were just so versatile. I think the Buffalo Bills, I don't know if they're that talented and have that type of ability to be versatile, but I think they're getting in that direction.
They're getting in that direction. And I mean, look at what that duo of Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon were able to do for the Chiefs last year, right? Like the Chiefs were able to turn on that running game with Pacheco when they needed to. And that really was something that they weren't getting from Clyde Edwards-Helaire previously. And that's an attitude thing as well from Pacheco. So like you got to have the right guy too. And it starts up front. I think Torrance, like you mentioned, like could he bring that switchy incognito vibe to the offensive line that really hasn't had like that mean streak in a positive way, right? We saw like Feliciano have streaks like that, but it wasn't really helping the play on the field. Maybe this is a good thing for Spencer Brown too, right? Like maybe it's a way to get him going a bit, get his confidence back up a bit. We know he's got a little bit of that in him. We've seen it in spurts. So maybe this is a good thing for Spencer Brown as well. And also just the entire offensive line is going to be motivated. I think like last year, obviously the whole situation with Bates and kind of getting that tender and like now him potentially being relegated to a backup role. Like this should be a very solid unit with good depth, with solid depth across the entire interior. Now we're going to get to the tackles in a minute, but I do like the way this is headed. And I do want the Bills to have that ability to kind of turn that run game on when they want to in the critical moments of games, right? When they really need to ice things out. And Chris says, you got to look at this offseason, the Bills' ineptitude on short yardage situations. And that was always the running joke, right? In the group chat was like, I trust the Bills more on 3rd and 7 than I do on 3rd and 2, which is not what you should be saying, right? Like that's not what you should be saying. So yeah, I like that comment.
Rick comes in and says, what would 13 personnel look like on the O-line? It would look like, obviously, you'd have Kincaid and you'd have Knox as your 2 tight ends, Reggie Gilliam as your fullback, Gabriel Davis or Stephon Diggs as your wide receiver, depending on what maybe you're trying to do in that situation. And then you'd have, Harris and Murray. Maybe it's a situation where you want to run the ball. So like Kincaid comes off the field and it's Ryan Bates as opposed to Kincaid because you want to go heavier. There's a ton of different ways in which you can go about utilizing that 13 personnel, and that the Buffalo Bills they've got bodies on top of bodies that they can stack and they can use in those situations. Justin Shorter, if he's active, could even be used in those situations as well. Tommy Doyle coming back from ACL, if he makes the team, he was the original, the OG tackle as a tight end. He could be utilized in those packages as well. The last thing I want to touch on at running back is I feel like the Buffalo Bills running back room has some really good handcuffs, right? If James Cook gets hurt, you have Nyheim Hines. If Damian Harris gets hurt, you have Latavius Murray. However, the last question I sort of have for you is what role is left for Nyheim Hines? Because Hardy likely limits his need to be the gadget window dressing guy in the passing game. How does Nyheim Hines get on the field on offense?
Well, that's the key on offense. I think Nyheim Hines is valuable in the sense that he's going to be the primary return man, but I don't like this is going to be, I don't know, maybe like on 2-minute drill or something, like as the Bills are like, going down and driving before the half, situations like that, maybe where you still don't necessarily want to take James Cook off the field, but maybe Naheem Hines has some packages there in the 2-minute situations. It's hard for me to figure that out right now because there's just like, you don't want to necessarily take James Cook off the field, but we've also seen the Bills have this rotation where it's like a series for this guy, series for that guy. So are they going to go to something like that? And if so, like, is it going to be a 3-man rotation with like Hines, Cook, and Harris, or Hines, Cook, and like it's just, I don't know. And like,
Fantasy owners do not want to hear that.
I don't really see a clear role yet for Hines on offense, especially because they have Hardy and that can kind of be that guy. But he is going to be, I think, the primary return man. So I'm still kind of okay with it because, like, instead of having that in the receiver room, you have it in the running back room. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it right now.
All right, we're going to get to all the positions tonight in the Buffalo Bills from top to bottom. We just hit running back. Tonight, we are reconstructing the Buffalo Bills 2023 roster. We deconstructed them back in January. We broke them apart. Now we're putting this team back together to see what they're going to look like on the field, what pieces we might still need to add. But first, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it's just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right. Quickest conversation we're going to have this evening is going to be the quarterback room. Not much to say here. Josh Allen is the starter. Kyle Allen is the backup, the veteran, the guy who's played games in this league before. He's won some games in spurts in this league before. And then you have Matt Barkley, sort of your veteran sideline presence on game day. He's going to be on your practice squad. We mentioned last year how awesome it is to have Matt Barkley, just because I think it helps the development of your bottom of the roster receivers. You can actually sort of like evaluate them properly because like at least someone semi-competent is throwing them the football. Someone who's been there and done that in this league, it hasn't been a lot that he's done. He's been there in this league. So he can sort of give these guys some pointers, help them get to maybe where they need to be and elevate their game a little bit. All that being said, there's 3 quarterbacks on the roster, and after QB1, they're kind of uninspiring in a sense, at least from a fan sense. Are you disappointed we don't have a young camp arm to challenge maybe Kyle Allen?
I mean, I thought maybe there was a chance we'd bring in a UDFA, right? But with the way the draft shook out and the way the Bills gave up that 4th round pick, and by the time they, traded down, obviously guys like Toon and, Thompson Robinson were off the board, our guys from the no matter what. So like, I don't know that it was a good spot for the Bills to take a quarterback in the draft. So I don't know what's really still out there as far as UDFAs, if it's even worth it. So in that sense, I'm not like super upset about it, but it would have been nice to maybe bring in another guy, and they still might, right? They still might, but obviously with the limited draft capital they had there in the middle section of the draft, it just never kind of shook out that way for them. We know the Bills aren't afraid to do it. They drafted Jake Fromm a couple years back. So they are willing. Brandon Beane is willing to take a quarterback if he sees the value there, but it just didn't shake out that way this year. So not disappointed. At the end of the day, it's not going to really make a difference for the 2023 season. So I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, if you look at it, one of my favorite tweets over the weekend was Joe Marino, formerly of the Draft Network, now part of the Locked On. He's always been part of the Locked On Network, but he's got his Draft Dude show at Locked On with Kyle Krabs. I think he said it best. He was like, Brock Purdy got some quarterbacks wicked overdrafted. Stetson Bennett in the 5th round. Are you freaking kidding me? Some quarterbacks got overdrafted this weekend due in large part. And every time they got drafted, it was Brock Purdy. Who's the next Brock Purdy? So the Buffalo Bills have Logan Bonner coming in as part of their rookie mini camp. Fun fact about Logan Bonner: he was the oldest draft eligible prospect this year out of Utah State. I think he's like 25 something years old, older than Stetson Bennett, believe it or not. Soon to be eligible for an AARP card. Lindsey Scott Jr. out of Incarnate Word, I think, was a prospect that was slept on, but he's shorter, like 6'1", like, or he might even be shorter than that, like 5'11". Really not the Buffalo Bills type, maybe more of a, they see as an athlete more than a quarterback, even though I liked him out of D2 Incarnate Word. But you're at the end of the day, like, you could look at some of the spring leagues, the Jordan Teamus, the Ben DiNucci's, the Jack Cohns of the world. You could even look to the USFL, like Chad Kelly's, right up the road in Toronto, but all of those things are ridiculously uninspiring. So you might as well just roll with the 3 you got and take a shot next year, because there's no one available that's even probably going to push Matt Barkley. So you might as well just save that roster spot for somebody at a different position. All right, switching our focus now to wide receiver, which we've already touched on just a tad bit. The Buffalo Bills, I'll tell you what, I think the roster locks right now are Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, and Deontay Hardy. Those are the guys who the Buffalo Bills, two of their best receivers, and Davis and Diggs. Hardy is obviously financially, the Buffalo Bills are tied to him. He was probably the most marquee of their free agency signings outside of Connor McGovern. The next three are the likely rounding out of your 6 in Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, and Justin Shorter. But I don't want to call any of them 100% lock. They're like 99.9, 95% locks. I don't want to put them 100% in there. And then you look at the rest of the roster, it's Keyshawn Johnson, Desmond Patman, Isaiah Coulter, and soon to be announced any day now, Tyrell Shavers out of San Diego, 6'6", by the way, and Jalen Wayne out of South Alabama, nephew, of Reggie Wayne. So when you look at the way this shakes out, Stephon Diggs is your X receiver. You have your Z receiver in Gabriel Davis, who now has a developmental handcuff in Justin Shorter. You have Deontay Hardy, who's sort of your 4, as Brandon Bean puts it, your flex, a guy you can move around, sort of a water bug type of wide receiver who can play inside, outside. And then you have 2 slot options in Khalil Shakir and Trent Sherfield. You have versatility to move guys around, I think more so than you had last year. You can be more creative, I think, in the way you use them in 2023. We haven't even gotten to Dalton Kincaid, who we'll talk about in the next segment. I think the goal has to be this year to take the pressure off of Stephon Diggs. And I think a big way to do that would be to use Gabriel Davis more properly and to use some of these guys more creatively. What are your thoughts?
Well, I like the mix of the room now, and I think you hit it on the head. Those 6 are probably the likely ones. I mean, I actually probably would say the 5, and then the Justin Shorter spot could be probably him.
Maybe 90% for Justin Shorter.
Yeah, but what I like about the room is that you've got guys that can play all over the field. Like, you have Khalil Shakir and Deontay Hardy, who are your wiggle guys, right? Those are your slot guys by craft, but they both play outside as well, right? So really the entire room outside of probably Justin Shorter, right? Even Trent Sherfield can play on the outside if need be. Now he's probably primarily been slot, but outside of Justin Shorter, like those 5 guys, even Diggs, Davis, Hardy, Sherfield, Shakir, like they can all move inside and out. And so on top of that, you've got a mix of speed with Hardy. You've got a mix of size with Davis and Shorter. Sherfield's a well put together guy. Like, he's pretty big, I would say, for slot standards, and he's obviously a great block. It looks like they're going more the physical route, but they're still leaving in Arsenal a guy like Deontay Hardy or a guy like Khalil Shakir, who has some speed, who has some wiggle to the room. But it's like their focus is kind of now moved towards that bigger, more physical type of receiver. Whereas in years past, it's been guys like Jamison Crowder. It's been guys like Cole Beasley, who was great for us, by the way. But like, they went kind of the other direction now. And I think trying to take that pressure off Stephon Diggs, you're right, is important. And I think this room is probably going to be the most interesting camp we've had since Stephon Diggs has been here to see kind of how all this stuff shakes out. I like it.
It's crazy. You mentioned the physicality aspect of it, right? Jamison Crowder last year, like thinking in the past, like Ray McLeod, Austin Prohl, like it's always been like all the Isaiah McKenzie. It's been all these like smaller dudes. Justin Shorter, 6'4", Keyshawn Johnson, 6'1", Desmond Patman, 6'5", Isaiah Coulter, 6'1". I'd have to double check that one, but I know he's above 6 foot. Tyrell Shavers, 6'6", Jalen Wayne, 6'1", like big physical guys who have the body types of like X receivers. Obviously, most of those guys are never going to be X receivers, but they have that sort of build to them. That's a pivot. That's a change in what the Buffalo Bills have usually looked for. So that's why Deontay Hardy is like the one dude now. And then maybe that's where we talked about Nyheim Hines as a handcuff. He's special teams first. Obviously, a really good kick returner, really good punt returner. He is handcuffed to James Cook. Nyheim Hines could also be handcuffed to an extent. He can't do everything Deontay Hardy does, but in terms of the motion, some of the water bug gadget type of stuff, Nyheim Hines could be a
roster optimization
handcuff to Deontay Hardy in that sense, because there's not a lot of other receivers outside of maybe Trent Sherfield who could do that for the Buffalo Bills. And we already touched on it at the top of the show, so I don't want to touch on it again too much, but emphasis on special teams. Like, I think Brandon Beane is a little snake bitten, losing Isaiah Hodgins, losing Raheem Blackshear, losing some of the players that we've lost over the last couple of years. On a number of occasions during his press conference, he's talking about like, yeah, he's just a guy where we'll know he'll have a jersey. He was looking for guys at maybe shallower position groups that he knew would make the team. I think it's in large part due he's sick of getting his developmental dudes poached. Like looking Jack Anderson, Rashad Wildgoose, like he's sick and tired of drafting these guys, falling in love with these guys, getting these guys into training camp. Nick McLeod's another one. Names just keep popping up in my head as we go here. And then other teams poaching them and taking them away. So whether it's Dorian Williams and his ability to play special teams, or Justin Shorter, or we needed that extra DB, and Alex Austin, very much like Christian Benford, could have that safety flex so he can maybe fill the Cam Lewis role and usurp Cam Lewis. He was looking for dudes that he doesn't have to cut at the end of August, because he knows if he cuts them, he runs the risk of losing them. And he doesn't want to fall into another situation like that. So emphasis on special teams. Hardy, he can be the backup return man. He had some fumble issues on returns, but he was electric when he could field the ball in New Orleans. Justin Shorter, four-face special teamer, just like Kumaro. Desmond Patman, known for his special teams. Tyrell Shavers, according to our guy Merck on Twitter, was the best gunner that he saw on film of any prospect in the draft, which I told Merck, I'm like, man, you're really getting into the weeds of scouting when you're scouting guys' scouting skills. Sherfield, four-face special teamer and a gunner as well. So the Buffalo Bills are adding a lot of guys who can make the roster, play special teams, and contribute on offense. So you love to see that. And the last thing is the one thing I think we haven't touched on with Justin Shorter, taking the pressure off of Stephon Diggs. Gabriel Davis sprained the ankle week 1. And a lot of people, his camp, defenders of Gabriel Davis, have used that ankle injury and the fact that they said it was lingering sort of as an excuse to talk about maybe why his play was not as optimized as it could have been, why maybe he wasn't used as much as he could have been. Jay Kumaro got hurt too. So now you have a guy like Justin Shorter in the fold who, even though he's more of a developmental player, on paper, he can do some of the things that Gabriel Davis does. So if Gabriel Davis does have an injury again, knock on wood, a guy like Justin Shorter could come in and maybe not to the extent that Gabriel Davis does, but in a niche way, fill the hole and take some of the pressure and maybe not have to rush Gabriel Davis back onto the field if he is hurt in that situation, because the way the Bills utilize Gabriel Davis and some of the ways that they use him is what takes the pressure off of Stephon Diggs.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the scouting reports, while not identical, there's some parallels, right, to Justin Shorter's scouting report and Gabriel Davis, right? When Gabriel Davis came out, the scouting report on him was that he was a strider. He was a sort of down the field guy. He didn't have a ton of route running prowess, but he could get down the field and similar we've seen with Justin Shorter's scouting report, the size, getting down the field, long strider. I think it's exciting because I do think that if you think about it, right, Gabriel Davis was what, 4th round pick, and Justin Shorter 5th round. Like it's not like Justin Shorter is this bum that went like at the late day 3 or undrafted. Like he was a 5th round pick, right? So I think he'll have every opportunity to by himself on this team and a role, right, if he's able to team. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do.
All right, next position group coming up is the tight ends. Obviously, the Buffalo Bills have their Y tight end in Dawson Knox, and they have their F tight end / slot receiver in Dalton Kincaid. They also have Quentin Morris, who's still on the depth chart, and Zach Davidson. I think this is a sneaky position where the Buffalo Bills could add maybe a veteran. I haven't had a chance to meander over to the list of free agents. I think Adam Sheehan might still be available, a couple of other names. The Buffalo Bills maybe could use another tight end to bring into training camp. I don't know whether they want to bring in a veteran guy, or I think Max Williams might still be out there as well, or they maybe just are going to go pull the trigger on like a younger guy who's, sitting around on the streets, or a spring league guy. I think this is 4 tight ends going into training camp. They could probably use 5. So it's a sneaky position to add there, but Knox and Kincaid are the locks, and Quentin Morris now finds himself back on the bubble. But again, the goal of this tight end room is to take the pressure off of Stephon Diggs. Like that's what the Buffalo Bills have to do this year. Take the pressure off of Stephon Diggs, find Josh Allen some layups, be better converting in short yardage situations, be better converting on 3rd down. I think all of these were the reasons that Dalton Kincaid was so sought after by Brandon Beane and why he was ultimately traded up for and then drafted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the Bills want to shift this direction and kind of have Kincaid and Knox on the field at the same time. I do still think there's a place on this team for Quentin Morris, because this is a situation where you're going to need some depth at this position that maybe you didn't necessarily need in the past because you didn't scheme for that, right? Or you didn't have the need for that extra player. So I think now, and I said this when they drafted Kincaid, like this is all eyes on Ken Dorsey now, right? On how we're going to use and deploy Dalton Kincaid. One of the biggest gripes about Dorsey last year was his inability to get Dawson Knox going, and we saw him kind of get it going the second half of the season. And obviously it's his first year too as a coordinator last year. So what's he going to learn from that? Getting a guy like Kincaid offers him a lot of opportunity to get creative and to create mismatches, right? And a guy that has that size, has the great hands, catch radius, all of those things, and also allows you to kind of, from a personnel standpoint, dictate to the defense maybe more so than you did previously with, like, as we call it, like the golden goose 12 personnel that the Rams were so good at dictating their offense out of with Jared Goff when he was there for those years with McVay. Like it's just one of those great personnel packages that you can do so much out of, run or pass. So this is going to be a very interesting development, and it's going to be, I think, yes, all eyes on Dalton Kincaid, but yet for me, Ken Dorsey is in the spotlight now, I think, with this Dalton Kincaid pick.
100%. Like you got to be more diverse. You got to be more, you have to, again, the Buffalo Bills are looking for mismatches. Oh, we're going to put Dalton Kincaid on the field. We're going to go heavy. We're going to force you to make a decision. If you decide to, keep your nickel out there, we can beat you physically, either running it down your throat or, having guys who are open even when they're not open with Dalton Kincaid. If you decide to bring the big, beefier guys out there, we can sort of play off of that too. Bring guys like Deontay Hardy onto the field. So the Buffalo Bills can play matchups. They can do certain things. They can be versatile. A source told Eric Turner, and I love seeing this tweet from him, that Dalton Kincaid, think of him as a slot receiver making tight end money. The Buffalo Bills are sort of getting that sort of discount there, getting a guy like Dalton Kincaid, getting a guy who can maybe do some of the things or offer you some of the safety blanket type of things that Cole Beasley did. And he's going to be able to do it maybe for the next contract, 2 contracts for a fraction of the cost of a wide receiver as well. One of the last things I wanted to address before we move on to offensive tackle is there's a lot of conversation now going on about like projecting Dalton Kincaid's stat line this season. And I don't want to get too much into that because I think we made that mistake last offseason with Gabriel Davis. And I think when Dalton Kincaid was first drafted, there was a number of people who were like hypercritical of the pick. And we were having this conversation in the Cover One group chat. Now, all of a sudden, 2 days later, people are writing articles about him being a 100 target receiver. You're just setting people up. You're just setting the expectations so high that it's going to end up being disappointing. I'm not expecting like some kind of like insane, like top 5, even like top 10 statistical tight end season from Dalton Kincaid in year 1, but I'm expecting him to contribute in a meaningful way on this offense and diversify this offense and be there in key situations like third down and in the red zone. But I'm not expecting the numbers to jump off the page in year 1, nor do I think fans should be expecting that. That would just be like a nice sweet bonus if it did happen.
Yeah, it's not going to be about necessarily volume for him, right? It's going to be more about impact. And I think that you can be impactful and he can be impactful to the offense with low volume when it comes to just, if you talk about number of catches, yards. I mean, Bruce Nolan put out a great stat earlier today. It was like, there's only been three tight ends in the last 20 years as rookies that have gone over 600 yards, right? I mean, it's just like, it's crazy. So, but the other thing is like he's going to do a lot of things that probably won't show up in the box score too, as far as like diversifying the offense. Like maybe he helps take some pressure off Stephon Diggs as well. Maybe he helps clear things out a bit in the running game from the passing game standpoint, as far as the running backs in the passing. Like there's a lot of things that he can impact on the field, even if he's not necessarily catching the ball. Now the Bills drafted him to catch the ball. Yeah. So I'm not trying to say that he's not going to, but there's going to be a lot of ways that he impacts the offense, I think, too positively, even when he's not being targeted.
And that's not to say that we shouldn't have high expectations for him in the future. Like he's going to contribute right away. He's going to play a key role right away. But in terms of like being an alpha, you know, like we saw, like I shared the clip on Twitter of him, like that 16 catch performance against USC where they upset number 7 USC. That's something that like you can look forward to hopefully having in 2024, in 2025, as he becomes more acclimated to the NFL game, as he continues to work on his body with pro level trainers, and, you know, as he catches up with the speed of the game, etc. Like have lofty expectations for him, but don't maybe expect him to meet those lofty expectations right away. But that doesn't mean he can't be a key contributor and an important contributor right away. All right, on to offensive tackles now. The Buffalo Bills appear to be rolling it back with Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown as their starting tackles. Those are the only two that I would consider roster locks. David Questenberry, I think, is close, but there are two guys behind him who could have a say if they show up to training camp and impress, and that is Tommy Doyle and Alec Anderson, last year's UDFA out of UCLA, who sat for a year on the practice squad. They also have Ryan Vandemark, Kevin Jarvis, who they signed, and then UDFA's Noah Henderson and Richard Garage out of Florida. Florida seemed to be, as you mentioned earlier, the school the Buffalo Bills were going to in this pre-draft process and last year as well with Kyer Elam. But honestly, surprising that after free agency with David Edwards and bringing Ike Butker back and Connor McGovern, Mitch Morse sort of solidifying and saying, I'm coming back. Like don't worry about me. I'm good. After all of that, it's really surprising to me that it was guard that was addressed in the draft and not offensive tackle, right?
I mean, I think so, right? And I think that's where a lot of people are going to go. And I would say like maybe this is a 2-year plan, right? To kind of not necessarily overhaul the offensive line, but like influx this offensive line with some young, like meaningful talent. And when I say that, I'm not trying to knock Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle. In fact, it's a compliment to them as far as what they're going to get out of those guys this year, giving them in year 3 now a chance for those guys to really step up. Bills made a pretty significant investment in the interior this offseason, and maybe next year, you know, giving Spencer Brown another year to kind of play right tackle, seeing what you can get out of Tommy Doyle this year is going to be what tips the scale or what kind of really clues the Bills in on what they want to do at the tackle position in the future. I think they should have still addressed it this year. I think they should have drafted someone or at least signed another player. They're very thin at tackle. And I think, like, yes, they did sign a couple UDFAs. Garage, obviously, he played left tackle and he's had experience on the interior as well at Florida. Noah Henderson, he's probably going to end up being a guard, I think, in the next level. And like these guys they're not super high ceiling guys. And so the roster at tackle is thin from my standpoint. And I think this is probably, for me, the position group on the team that I have the most concern about. For me, it is.
I'm with you. I'm still like low on our defensive tackles too. I think that stress and just the defensive line in general. I think that stressor will be relieved once they get on the field. But just on paper, it's sort of like underwhelming without Von Miller. But you're right. It's definitely off the tackle because it's going to be interesting to see how many cans the Buffalo Bills are willing to kick down the road. Because I just mentioned my concern about the defensive line, and based on Brandon Beane's wording in some of his post-draft press conferences, and based on some of the things that we're hearing, names like Yannick Ngakoue, names like Poona Ford, names like Justin Houston, like Melvin Ingram, like the Buffalo Bills could be maybe going after some veteran D linemen. How many cans are they willing to kick down the road? How many contracts are they willing to restructure to bring guys in? Who knows? But could the Buffalo Bills be willing to also bring in an offensive tackle? Looking at free agency and what's still available, Donovan Smith, George Font, Cameron Irving, Jason Peters, Cameron Fleming, Ty Nsekhe, Mike Remmers, and Brandon Shell, who was actually the Buffalo Bills had some rumored interest in earlier this offseason. Not exactly like a murderer's row of names. The three I have highlighted are George Font, Cameron Irving, and Cameron Fleming. I think all of those guys could come in and could really give David Quessenberry a run for his money and maybe be an upgrade over Quessenberry. So if there was an injury to Deion Dawkins, if there was an injury to Spencer Brown, maybe we felt a tad more comfortable because, I mean, that offense, I think back to the New England game, and again, Quessenberry was hurt, so maybe I'm being too harsh and too critical, but despite the fact that we won that game in Foxborough, that offense was like hanging on by a thread, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that Deion Dawkins wasn't playing, and David Quessenberry was not exactly up to snuff. What are your thoughts on the free agent market off the tackle, and do you think the Buffalo Bills will be willing to reach out to a veteran?
Yeah, I do. It's not exactly an inspiring crop. I'll say Cameron Irving maybe is interesting. Cam Fleming, the Cams, I would say are intriguing to me a bit, but like that's to me like Quessenberry again, like just another, like maybe a little bit more of a tackle, like maybe more a little bit stability than Quessenberry, but they brought Quessenberry back because he's played there for a year. So like it's not inspiring. I'll say that. Yeah. And so that's why for me, as Chris pointed out in the comment section, that he's still concerned about DL, defensive line. Offensive tackle is still more concerning to me just because on top of the depth you have now, there's also not a great crop of free agents, I don't think, still out there. So they probably will bring in another guy, maybe a vet, to be there in camp. They did sign the couple of UDFAs as well, like you mentioned, and Alec Anderson's still there, but I'm worried. I am worried about this group.
And this is where the development of Tommy Doyle is important coming off that ACL. This is where the development of maybe Alec Anderson is super important. So those are things to keep an eye on in training camp. And also some comments from Brandon Beane as well. Ryan Bates could possibly, he said Ryan Bates could get us out of a game at right tackle. So he talked about Ryan Bates. Osiris
5 position flex for Ryan Bates on the line.
Osiris Torrance was talked about as a right tackle. God, no, please no. Let's stop.
No,
I don't know who asked that question or why they asked it. Stop. Do not even manifest that. Do not put that out there into the world. So it'll be interesting to see where the Buffalo Bills pivot and go off as tackle, but certainly they could add a veteran there. And as Chris Jenke mentioned, they could maybe wait to see if somebody's cut in training camp. Usually offensive tackles, things like that. I mean, we've traded like Russell Bodine. We've traded some scrubs for parts for draft picks. Maybe Brandon Beane with those 10 draft picks might maybe make a trade in training camp. Who knows? But Off tackle is definitely something to keep an eye on. Whereas interior offensive line went from maybe a weak position on the Buffalo Bills last year to something that's rather exciting. You have Connor McGovern, who's going to be playing left guard, the Bills' biggest free agent addition. You have Osiris Torrance, who we talked about at the top of the show. Super exciting to get him, plug him in at right guard. We just mentioned Ryan Bates, who's now maybe one of, if not the best backup interior offensive lineman in all of football. Like, this is a guy who could start for a ton of teams, be a run-of-the-mill starter. Well, he's now your at least minimum 3-position backup, center, left guard, right guard. And who knows, like, as Brandon Beane said, could get you out of a game at right tackle, thinking back to that Miami game last year. They also added David Edwards. They have Ike Bodker. They drafted one of your guys, Nick Broker. Matt Miller from ESPN had a great comment about Nick Broker. He said, I project Nick Broker as a third guard, fourth tackle in the National Football League. So he's got some of that versatility where he can be sort of like a Ryan Bates type, come off the bench and be a stopgap guard who won't embarrass himself. And he still is decent enough as a tackle to be maybe like a David Quessenberry type, where like you don't want to play him a tackle, but like you could if you needed to. So he's sort of just, again, a versatile chess piece. I don't think he'll ever be more than a backup, but he's still an exciting piece to have. And you have Mitch Morse and Greg Manx. Obviously, I forgot to mention sort of the centers there. Surprised by the emphasis on the interior guard specifically. I assumed that if they went interior, they would at least go a guy with like center flex. Now they have a ton of guys who can play center of this guard group, but I don't know. Like, are you surprised that they double, triple, quadruple down on the interior offensive line this offseason?
Well, I think they're making a concerted effort to build this offensive line. It looks like from the inside out, and they are also, I think, really showing that they really want to prevent these up the middle pressures on Josh Allen. And I know that, some of those big losses that he's taken in sacks where he's tried to hold on to the ball have been pressures from up the middle where he runs straight back and just holds the ball. When he gets pressured from the outside, sometimes he's able to kind of circle back or bootleg, or, he's able to sometimes get around those pressures. So I think the Bills, looking at it in the context of what, at least in the short term, Josh Allen can make the most out of, like, going to be a little bit easier for him maybe to kind of avoid those pressures from the outside. And you still have Deion Dawkins on the left. So I like what they're trying to do, really shore up that interior. I have said it on this show many times. I'd rather draft a stud who can play one position as my starter and put him there and set it and forget it for 10 years. And that's what they did for Torrance. I hope it looks like it. And then Broker as your depth is the guy that gives you that versatility a bit. He played left tackle, obviously, a bit before he switched over to left guard. Didn't allow a single snap last year on 450 plus snaps. He's got that high motor. He's good fundamentally. Someone the Bills can work with. Shorter arms, so probably will be mostly a guard in the pros, but a good, nice depth piece and a good, solid draft pick, I think.
Yeah, Roy Collins comes in and says maybe Beane trades away one of the interior offensive linemen. Yeah, I mean, like late August, some teams start to get some injuries. All of a sudden, maybe you can get a 6th or a 7th round draft pick for David Edwards or for Ike Bodker. And now you add even more draft picks for what every single person on Twitter wants to tell me is the Buffalo Bills, building up their arsenal so they can go after Marvin Harrison Jr. because that's reality. That's reality. Ralph Wilson Sr. comes in and says, seems like the plan is keeping Morse for a couple more years. Yes and no. Like, I think we're all so quick to like throw Mitch Morse out the door or kick Mitch Morse out the door, but maybe he does have a couple more years in him. But Ryan, I posted this on social media. I truly believe it. And I think this could have been I think when Mitch Morse does walk away, Ryan Bates will be given the opportunity to take his spot. And now you have a chance for him to get a lot of more snaps at center this season, even if it's just in practice, because you now have Osiris Torrance. So I'm not saying that like Ryan Bates is going to be handed the job when Mitch Morse finally is let go or walks away, but I think he will be allowed to compete with a relatively high draft pick, like a day 2 pick at center when that day does come, because I do think Ryan Bates could be a starting center in the National Football League. So it's exciting now to have him as that versatile, chess piece sort of backup and a guy you can start grooming and getting more snaps as a center behind Mitch Morse. I sort of mentioned it. We double, tripled, quadrupled down at offensive guard. This was a notion that I heard a lot from people on social media. Man, we drafted 2 guards in Torrance and Broker after signing Edwards, re-signing Bucker, signing McGovern. Oh, we drafted Justin Shorter in the 5th round after signing Trent Sherfield, after signing Deontay Hardy. People were a little upset that the Buffalo Bills were double, tripling down at positions and maybe ignoring other positions because we haven't added an edge rusher. We haven't added a defensive tackle. We haven't really addressed the traditional Mike linebacker. So people are like, whoa. We're not all these guys are going to make the team and we're ignoring other positions. What were your thoughts on that?
I don't know if it's like, I don't think it's intentional, right? I think it's like when the draft comes, like you just kind of have to see how the board falls. Now, I think this is where people had issue with the Dorian Williams pick, right? Because there were some offensive tackles still on the board, but maybe the Bills didn't see that as like enough competition to push a guy like Spencer Brown, down the depth chart. I don't know, right? I don't know. I just feel like it's hard to go, like when you're a good team, you feel like you shouldn't have to leave any major holes in an off season, but the Bills, like roster wise, I think the approach this time was like, maybe we really concentrate our efforts on a position or two, like in this case, interior offensive line, so that when it comes for next year, we really can narrow our focus on the positions that we still need to fill and not be spread too thin. Because we saw this year, it did feel like they were a little spread too thin, and Bean did a great job, patching holes during free agency with the dollars he had, but they were spread thin, and you don't want to be in that position every single offseason.
All right, let's shift our focus and attention now to the defensive side of the ball. Let's start with the edge rusher position or the defensive end position. Von Miller, who knows when he'll be back based on Von Miller, the way he sort of talks, the way he carries himself. You'd expect that man to be out there the first day of training camp, but who knows? If you're using the Trey White timeline, you might maybe see him somewhere around Thanksgiving. Gregory Rousseau coming into year 3, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, Shaq Lawson is back, and then obviously there's Kingsley Jonathan. So the Buffalo Bills have literally not added a single piece to an edge rushing group that did not look good when Von Miller went down with an injury last year. Could the Bills look for a veteran, a late in free agency type of bargain to free up some money? Maybe make a splash more than Brandon Beane talks about. I don't know. You guys know any $2 million free agents out there? Is edge rusher a position where the Buffalo Bills might want to consider restructuring somebody so they can pay a guy $6, $7, $8 million to come in here for 1 year?
Yes. I think the short answer for me is yes. And I think the reason for that is unlike offensive tackle, I still think there's some pretty good edge rushers available in free agency. And so like this is an area where I feel like the Bills could still add like a solid piece, right? Whether it's Justin Houston, whether it's Ngakoue, whether it's someone like that, right? I know Eric Turner really likes Justin Houston. We talked about him on our show. Yep. He's played in multiple systems. He's played in that 3-4 in Baltimore as an outside linebacker. He's played as a 3-4 edge. He's played as a 4-3 edge. Like he's played in a lot of different alignments in his career. So he would be the tops of my list, but there's a number of guys, Melvin Ingram, like there's guys out there at edge. And so for me, I'm like, okay, maybe Brandon Beane's looking at this. Like, I don't have to go after edge in the draft because I know in my pocket, I've got a list of 7 to 10 guys I could potentially get on the phone and say, hey, do you want to come here on a Super Bowl run, fill in for Von Miller while he's on the mend and really play meaningful snaps at the tail end of your career? Some of those guys are going to say yes. And RJ's right on here. There's still vet talent at edge and free agency. I think for the positions the Bills need, it's the best crop of talent still left in free agency at edge. And so I'm kind of okay with it, but that's assuming Brandon Beane's going to do something here. If he doesn't do anything, I'll be scratching my head a little bit.
Yeah, you look at the names. You mentioned some already. Yannick Ngakoue, Justin Houston, Melvin Ingram, Leonard Floyd, Frank Clark, Jadeveon Clowney, Robert Quinn, Marcus Golden. Those were the names that I put down. There were some more too, but those were maybe the most intriguing names. But the three that stick out the most to me, Ngakoue, Houston, and Ingram. And we've had this conversation in the Cover One group chat, and I know Eric's been posting about it as well. The two guys that you should be targeting here are Yannick Ngakoue and Justin Houston. Those would be the two highest impact guys. Those are the guys that you're going to possibly have to kick some cans down the road, restructure a contract. I doubt you get Yannick Ngakoue or Justin Houston, despite the fact that they probably want to play on a winning team. I doubt you're going to get them for $2 million a year. So those are the guys that you're going to have to open up the piggy bank and make it work financially for. Are the Buffalo Bills willing to do that? We will find out in the coming weeks, hopefully weeks and not months. I don't want to take this into training camp. The guy who could take the $2 million offer would be Melvin Ingram, who still has something left as a pass rusher. So he's sort of maybe the finger quotes bargain bin guy. Maybe Leonard Floyd could be thrown in there as well, previously playing with Von Miller in Los Angeles as well. So it'll be really intriguing to see how or who they pursue at edge rusher. And once they do pursue somebody, could that put the future of AJ Epinesa or Boogie Basham into question? Could the Buffalo Bills look to move on or cut bait from one of those two, maybe in a way that they cut bait from guys like Zach Moss in years past, a day two pick where they're just like, it's run its course. They're a rotational guy. They're not embarrassing. They're not puking all over themselves, but they're not the player we thought they were. Do you see that happening or occurring with AJ Epinesa or Boogie Basham?
I don't think so, only because I think the Bills need to add here and not replace at the moment, right?
Yeah.
If Von Miller was healthy, we probably wouldn't be really even having this discussion, right? So I think this is really about adding to the room at this point and not necessarily getting rid of somebody. I don't want to necessarily add a veteran pass rusher just to cut one of these guys that's not costing you a lot of money, by the way, against the salary cap. So would I be upset if one of those guys got moved? No. Would I be upset if they got outright cut? I'd be a little disappointed if they got outright cut, right? I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but no, I think I'm not expecting either of those guys to be gone.
Onto the interior defensive line, and again, outside of re-signing players like Jordan Phillips, this is a position that was 100% ignored thus far in the offseason by Brandon Beane. You have Ed Oliver, you have Daquan Jones, you have Jordan Phillips, and you have Tim Settle, your top four returning. We saw sort of the warts last year. Daquan Jones got hurt. He was sort of the key in the ignition, right? That made everything else go. When he was injured, everyone else struggled. Ed Oliver, much like Gabriel Davis, struggled with injuries all season, limited his effectiveness. Jordan Phillips got hurt towards the end of the season in that embarrassing play where he was chasing down Mac Jones. And then because Jordan Phillips is a 3-tech and Ed Oliver is a 3-tech and Tim Settle, quite frankly, should be a 3-tech, there were 3 3-techs, 1 1-tech. Tim Settle was asked to maybe do some things that he's not maybe the best at, and they didn't really lean into his strengths. And Tim Settle was a disappointment last year.
Yeah.
Behind that, you have Brandon Bryant, who's always been effective when he's played in sort of a stopgap role. Ilianku, who's been effective when he plays in a stopgap role. But neither of those guys are really moving the needle for you. They're just break glass in case of emergency defensive tackles. They've got Kendall Vickers. They've got Cortez Broughton as developmental DTs, and they are going to be adding in the next day or so DJ Dale, a UDFA out of Alabama, another 1-tech to go along with Ilianku behind Daquan Jones. But again, not much of an investment from a team that has no defensive tackles under contract next season.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably see a Daquan Jones extension at some point, get that shored up, make sure you have that sort of
Mhm.
key cog in that interior in place, for the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. I look at this position, there's a lot of bodies, but there's not a lot of there's a cliff right after the top of the road here. Like behind Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, like you don't want guys like Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips to be playing out of position. You really need a one tech to kind of come in and back up
Mhm.
Daquan Jones. But we saw even in the Star Latulele days, the Bills weren't always they have never really invested in that true one tech backup since Sean
Yeah.
McDermott's been here. It's always been just these tweeners and they filled in. So I expect it to be more of the same, to be honest. Now, what I will say, similar to Edge, not maybe quite as good as Edge, but there's still a lot of good vet names out there. Now, the question here becomes, you have a lot of bodies. So in the case that you would maybe potentially bring in a veteran interior defensive lineman, I think you'd likely see someone gone, probably one of the bottom of the roster guys, which is fine. But some decent names out there. I know you've got them in the show notes. Linval Joseph, Puna Ford. Like
Mhm.
there's some guys out there. Al Woods is a name that people mention. I know
Yeah.
that Greg Thompson's really high on Puna Ford if we can get him, but there's names, right? And there's
Yeah.
names, veterans. And I will say this about interior defensive linemen. They age well when it comes
Yeah.
to the NFL. Like they're one of the few positions where you can get older guys and they're still as effective, and their effectiveness doesn't diminish as quickly as some other positions. So
Mhm.
age not as much of a factor here for interior defensive line as it might be for other positions.
Yeah. I think if Brandon Beane was being candid, and he sort of already hinted at it, I think his biggest regret this offseason is not getting a youthful defensive tackle of some variety onto this roster. He sounded very remorseful about that fact, and the fact that the board just did not fall that way on draft day because of the situation heading into 2024. But there's nothing we can do about that now. My biggest concern is, what if Daquan Jones can't stay healthy? That is my biggest
Big concern.
concern with
Big
this
concern.
defense right now. So to me, I'm looking for a backup one tech. So in free agency, you have some choices: Puna Ford, Matt Ioannidis, Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph, Al Woods, Michael Brocker, more of a three tech, but Shelby Harris. And you also have guys like Mike Pennell and Jaleel Johnson. It'll be interesting to see where the Buffalo Bills decide to go and how they decide to pivot. I
Mm,
think most fans would prefer Puna Ford or Matt Ioannidis because those are the two most, maybe I don't want to say most recognizable names, but probably the two best players if we're being frank. But at the end of the day, if you can convince a guy like Ndamukong Suh to come here, that's a boon for you. He still played very well in Philadelphia last year when Jordan Davis got hurt, filling a role for that Eagles defensive line. And even some of the journeyman guys, Mike Pennell, Jaleel Johnson, guys who can just take up some space. I'd feel more comfortable and confident with them and allowing Tim Settle to play three tech as opposed to Tim Settle trying to be something he's not and
mhm.
being a one tech.
Yep. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think even when we signed him Settle, right, there were people
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, he can be both," but like it always seemed like I thought, and I know a lot of people thought, like naturally his pass rushing ability and what he brought to the table was more of a natural three tech. So I'd like to see him back in position, but it's all Jordan Phillips as well, right? So it's like you got a load of three techs. You need that backup one tech.
Looking at the linebacker sort of position now, the guys who sort of are the key cogs: Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams, Tyrell Dodson. Then you also have AJ Klein, Balon Spector, Tyler Matakevich. I feel like we got to be seeing some kind of transition in scheme to
Yep.
something a little bit more different, a little bit more aggressive. Maybe bringing in guys like Taylor Rapp, being a little bit more rotational in your use of safeties and linebackers from Sean McDermott this year. Because, like I said, even though he's walked back those statements, being kind of soured on Dorian Williams being a defensive player for the Buffalo Bills this year. So it's really an aging AJ Klein versus a bad in coverage Tyrell Dodson versus a short arm Terrell Bernard versus sort of maybe the sleeper later round pick in Baylon Spector at linebacker outside of Matt Milano. How do you see maybe this shaking out as we head into training camp?
Yeah, and we'll get to your super chat just here in a second. There has to be. I'm not saying there's going to be a major overhaul in philosophy, but it looks like there's going to be some evolution here. And the Bills have always been kind of under McDermott, they've always been more of like that sort of undersized, speedier style defense, right? When it came to even the front seven. And so they're really looking like they're leaning into that now. Spector has some size, but like you mentioned, like they've drafted two guys back-to-back years in the third round, speed at the linebacker position, as Spud says, attack and blitzing more. These guys can fly around the field. Bernard, a good blitzer. Dorian, good sideline to sideline with the big, long arms. Klein, he does have ability to get downhill as well. But I think that the Bills are like pretty much admitting that like they're going to have to change some things without a guy like Tremaine Edmonds in the defense, right? It's just like they just don't have that guy anymore. And that type of guy is really hard to find, whether it be in the draft or through free agency, without paying what Tremaine Edmonds got in free agency dollar-wise. So I think there's going to have to be a little bit of a shift in philosophy here. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to see like if they're going to not shift too far, like Baylon Spector have a shot here, but it doesn't sound promising that Dorian Williams is going to get significant playing time, and that kind of makes me worried about guys like Tyrell Dodson and Terrell Bernard getting a lot of playing time. So,
I'm also not buying the fact that like we talked about, like, oh, maybe tight end, you could bring in a veteran. Offensive tackle, you can bring in a veteran. Obviously, we've been just pumping defensive line, whether it's tackle or whether it is edge, bring in a veteran. I don't think you're going to see the Buffalo Bills go out and chase another veteran at linebacker. I could be wrong, but I think that they're mostly content with what they have. They have to add bodies for training camp, but I think it'll mostly be like the Andre Smiths of the world and the Joe Giles Harrises of the world. Like they'll find those type of guys over the next couple of weeks and months. They'll add those type of guys. But I think the guys who are on the roster are the dudes that they're going to be rolling with. Maybe a guy gets cut in camp or towards the end of camps. Maybe a guy becomes available via trade that intrigues the Bills. But I think they're going to roll with what they got. If they do decide to add some free agents, Blake Cashman is a guy I've always liked. He kind of flamed out after I really liked him at Minnesota. Kind of fits the mold of what the Bills like. He's 26 years old. Miles Jack is just shot with injuries. I don't really think he's an option for the Bills. Rashaan Evans, 27 years old, still had a little bit of a rebound in Atlanta. The Buffalo Bills could maybe look to him. Again, injury concerns. Zach Cunningham, 28 years old. He's played his entire career, or not his entire career because he's with Houston for a little bit, but Houston and Tennessee. Deion Jones is the oldest 28-year-old I've ever seen, but Deion Jones.
How is that guy only 28?
And then Quan Alexander, also the oldest 28-year-old, I think, in the history of linebackers. Quan Alexander is still available. I mean, looking elsewhere, I mean, Damian Wilson has some ties to the Buffalo Bills. I believe he played a little bit, at least with some people in Carolina. He's available. Corey Littleton, Nick Kwiatkowski, Neville Hewitt, like again, Kevin Pierre-Louis, who was a guy that you liked a couple of years ago. Just not a lot of names. I was leaning towards the younger ones if the Buffalo Bills were going to take a shot. All right. Oh, super chat here from Carl Toman. Sorry it took us so long to get to that. I just started a new segment, so I apologize, Carl, but we're going to get to you now. He says, did we get any values in our UDFA signings? Offensive tackle Noah Henderson, wide receiver Jalen Wayne, defensive lineman DJ Dale, running back Jordan Mims, wide receiver Tyrell Shavers, or offensive lineman Richard Garage. What do you think? Like, what UDFA sticks out the most to you? I know that there are two that stick out to me, but I'll let you go first here.
Yeah, I mean, Shavers sticks out obviously for that special teams ability, that gunning ability, and obviously, like, we think Justin Shorter is very likely to make the team, but you never know, right? If he's had an injury history in the past. If he gets dinged up in camp and Shavers really shows his worth on special teams, he could be like a Kumaro of this year potentially, right? If he doesn't, it's not a 0% chance, right? Like he's got a chance. This guy probably isn't making the team, but I do like his chances of being on the practice squad. And that's, I like Jordan Mims, running back from Fresno State. Like I watched a couple of the Fresno State games today, while I had a bit of time, because I was like, okay, didn't really look into him too much in the pre-draft process, but did a little bit more research on him today. I like the way he runs. I think he's got a good nose for the end zone. I think that he could be like a Latavius Murray type in the future. For a bigger guy, he's got pretty good hands. And it seemed like he had pretty good footwork as well. So I like Jordan Mims. I think like he's definitely not the same type of guy as a Blackshear from last year, but I like him. As far as the offensive linemen are concerned, Henderson, he's a guy from right down here in ECU, blocked for Keaton Mitchell, played a lot of games, pretty big guy. I think he's like 6'6", 320. So he's got like a nice body, but he doesn't move that great. And as far as Garage, like he played a lot of places on the offensive line for Florida, but he's really not a super athletic guy either. I think he was like a 1 point something RAS, and like he's not the most nimble dude. So you like the versatility, but for me, I think the guys that intrigue me the most are probably Mims and Shavers, the offensive guys.
Yeah, the two that stuck out the most to me were Tyrell Shavers. It's been reported that he got a 3-year deal from the Buffalo Bills.
They want to develop him, man.
And
they want to develop.
They want to develop him, and I think the thing that they want to develop, first of all, he's 6'6". He was originally recruited to Alabama, sort of flamed out there, eventually found his way to San Diego. But again, our guy Merck on Twitter, somebody that we go to a lot, we RT a lot, we have conversations with a lot, said in his scouting of the prospects this year, Tyrell Shavers was by far the best gunner on special teams. So that's why the Buffalo Bills went after Tyrell Shavers. Could he upset some people and make the active roster? Maybe. I doubt that he upsets Justin Shorter, a 5th-round draft pick. I doubt the Buffalo Bills carry 7 wide receivers, but maybe Tyrell Shavers does enough to justify that spot with his ability to play special teams. You can never discount somebody, especially on the Buffalo Bills, with the ability to play special teams. And then the second one that sticks out to me is DJ Dale from Alabama. He's a little undersized for a 1 tech at 6'1", just over 300 pounds. But this is a guy who's got an ability to eat space. Eric and Anthony have been showing some clips of him just, taking on, filling some gaps, taking on guys, freeing up other people. He's never a guy who's going to be able to really, rush the passer or get upfield. But he's the kind of guy who can eat up some space. He can free up things for other people. So maybe DJ Dale in training camp, in the preseason, can show value, not as maybe the best player in the world, but as the player who can free other people up to be the best version of themselves along that defensive line. And he can maybe make it as a backup 1 tech. Maybe the Buffalo Bills carry 5 defensive tackles. So I would go with Shavers, and I would go with DJ Dale as my 2 guys in the UDFA category. Next position group is cornerback. And I'll tell you what, I'm pretty confident in this position group. And I think I'm most excited about this position group heading into training camp. Why? You have Tre'Davious White, who we all know and love, now 2 years removed from an ACL. So you're hoping that he sort of rounds back into form. A lot of people were disappointed. A lot of the conversation this offseason has been, is Trey White shot? Does he still got anything left? Is he ever going to be the same? So Trey White now 2 years removed from an ACL. Kyer Elam, 2nd year in the system. You think he's more comfortable, more confident. You know the athlete he is, and he's shown some of the flash plays that he's capable of. Christian Benford, his versatility and how he played his rookie year, now going into year 2. Again, the guy catches a lot of flack from Bills fans, but you're not going to find a 4th corner in the National Football League better than Dane Jackson. Dane Jackson is a really good 4th corner if that's what he infects. If he's CB2, we have a problem. But as CB4, that's awesome depth in Dane Jackson. And now you throw Alex Austin into the mix, who is really, again, I told, like, you saw my initial list for my guys. It was Alex Austin at first, and then I changed
you
my
did
mind
have
last
him on
second.
there.
I went
You
to
did
Riley
have him.
Moss.
I have the
and
receipts. I have the receipts.
I regret it now, but I really liked Alex Austin, and the reason why I do is like he fits the mold of what the Buffalo Bills draft late, right? He's in the same mold as a Christian Benford, of Dane Jackson, of Levi Wallace. He's a guy where he's got the skills, especially with guys like Sean McDermott and John Butler coaching him. I think he takes Cam Lewis's spot on the roster. I think he's competing with Christian Benford to see like who stays at corner, who moves to safety, who's the kind of guy who flexes in practice a little bit. And then obviously in the nickel, you have Teron Johnson. His backup is a question mark. We really wanted Quan Martin because we wanted the backup nickel. We wanted the future safety. We don't ever want Saran Neal to see the field on defense. Cam Lewis is back for another season. Jamarcus Ingram and Kyler McMichael round out the group. What are your thoughts on cornerback heading into training camp?
Just overall, the secondary, I feel really good about it. But corner, I think we had talked about in the pre-free agency that getting Dane Jackson back was kind of like the first domino to fall into kind of really solidifying back up the secondary. This is before we obviously re-signed Jordan Poyer, and it just kind of set everything else in place, right? Like Trey White, another year removed from that injury. Kaiir Elam going into his second year. We saw the good play from Christian Benford last year before he hurt his hand and wrist. And then Dane Jackson, if unspectacular, steady, right, play from your fourth corner is fine. And then you have a guy like Alex Austin you bring in that's intriguing to me in the draft to potentially unseat Cam Lewis. Like, this is a really fun and solid group. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is is Kaiir Elam potentially going to take that CB1 mantle from Trey White this year? Like, depending on what happens with, take a step, right? I'm not saying he's going to all of a sudden be better than Trey White, but can he take that step to be the future for the Bills at the corner position, right? Not saying Trey's on his way out by any means, but can we see that step from Kaiir Elam this year? There's a lot of potential in this room. And some of that potential, by the way, is Trey White coming back from that injury another year removed and putting that more in the rear view. So I'm pretty excited about this group. Did I lose you?
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. I never lost you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was short. So you were short circuiting earlier. I was short circuiting now. We gotta get our internet connections checked here. But
freaking Google, man.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic about the cornerback position. Again, the biggest issue is backup nickel. What are your thoughts about what's going on behind Teron Johnson? Could Christian Benford maybe get a little bit of nickel look?
Yeah, maybe. I thought maybe there was an outside chance that the Bills would draft a nickel corner. I believe they had Clark Phillips in for a top 30 visit, who was a nickel corner, I believe, in this year's draft. He went, can't remember exactly what round he went, but they were sniffing around a little bit, right, for that backup nickel. And maybe this becomes a situation where it's more down and distance dependent, where maybe you see they're not going to take Taron Johnson off the field, but maybe they get creative in using Taron Johnson and Taylor Rapp together, or certain things like that. And maybe Christian Benford plays a role in that. These guys that they kind of had that were sort of that either or. I mean, there's really not that guy anymore that you see that's obvious on the roster. And you don't have that guy right now. So there's a lot of pressure on Taron Johnson to stay healthy, obviously. But I do think the Bills could cobble it together, right, if they needed to. So it's concerning, but out of all the concerns I have, if you start talking about offensive tackle, defensive line, edge, it's probably a little bit lower on the list.
Yeah, and Taylor Rapp, I think, plays a role in that as well, as you mentioned, too. So that could be sort of an intriguing name to throw out there. And that leads us to our sort of final position group here, and that is the safety position, something that I'm cautiously optimistic about heading into 2023, mostly because Micah Hyde's coming off of a rather significant injury, and then Damar Hamlin's coming off a super significant injury. So it's dependent on those two guys' health, but the safety room looks pretty good. Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Taylor Rapp, Damar Hamlin, Zane Anderson, and Jared Maiden. How are you feeling about the safety position heading into training camp?
I feel good. I think whatever happens with Damar will just be a cherry on top if he's going to come back and he's going to play. Obviously, he's intending to, so that's great. And signing Taylor Rapp after re-signing Jordan Poyer was probably, was a signing that maybe others didn't expect, or we didn't expect because we did re-sign Jordan Poyer. But man, it really looks good now because of you look at the depth chart and you're like, the Bills have always rolled with 4. Not sure what's going to happen with Damar. We assume he'll be back. And Jaquan Johnson's no longer here, right? To kind of fill that 4th safety role. We haven't, to this point at least, brought Dean Marlowe back, so he's still out there. But I love the group, right? I think Micah Hyde was close to coming back in that playoff game. If we had made it to the AFC Championship game, it sounded like he would have been back. And obviously Jordan Poyer battled through some nagging injuries last year. You assume he's going to be back to health as well. You just want Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer absolutely as healthy as possible going into the season. I wonder if Sean McDermott will take it easier on those guys throughout training camp, knowing that I would expect that those guys would get probably more rest than maybe some others.
Man, who would have thought, in January that we would see Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde manning, the middle of our defense again, ever. We had that conversation. Was this the last we saw of Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde? So it is awesome that those two are going to be manning the middle of the defense again. But just like defensive tackle, the future of this position beyond 2023 is suspect. So a little fun here at the end of the show. I want to talk about positions of need when we start our 2024 draft prep, because me and you, we like to watch college ball. We like to focus on the draft year round. What are some positions that you're going to be looking at awfully closely once college football season starts? I know I got 2 in mind that I'm going to be laser focused on. How about yourself?
I'm definitely going to be looking at defensive line. As much as it feels like a broken record talking about defensive line with this team, I'm definitely going to be looking at defensive line. We're getting towards the tipping point here where, probably AJ Epinesa is not going to get a second contract with the Bills. I think he'll be going into his last year, right? Next year on his contract in 2024. So that's going to be interesting. Like, we'll see what happens when Miller comes back, what kind of juice he has left. Obviously, it's been well documented, the contract situations of the interior. So defensive line, going to be a big focus for me. And then probably offensive tackle again, just because of all the investment the Bills made in free agency and in the draft to the interior, I could see a similar scenario playing out, but for the tackle position next year. Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle, this is year 3 for them. Next year will be the last years on their contracts if they don't re-sign. So offensive tackle and defensive line are probably my top 2 focus areas, which maybe not the most fun to look at offensive tackle, but important, man. It's important.
Looking for me, it's defensive tackle and safety all the way. Like, that's gonna be my heavy focus. But as you mentioned, offensive tackle, edge rusher are going to get my attention as well. Wide receiver will always get my attention. I'm going to keep my eyes on those centers as well. If this is Mitch Morse's last year, Ryan Bates will need some competition in 2023. So definitely a lot of positions to keep an eye on, but things change. Things change quick. Every year we talk about the Bills need this, and this, and the mock drafts look a certain way in January, and then they're completely different after free agency in March. But these are definitely some positions to keep an eye on. For me, defensive tackle and safety the most. We got a super chat coming in here from 78 Maximilian. Always appreciate you, 78 Max, and always appreciate all the super chatters out there. He says, thank you guys for your awesome coverage this past weekend. Thank you. We appreciate that. Do you think that Bean's comments about talking to a couple UFA indicate a defensive line ad? I'm pretty confident that sometime over the next couple of weeks, one of these 5 guys will be a Buffalo Bill. Yannick Ngakoue, Justin Houston, Melvin Ingram, Poona Ford, Matt Ioannidis. I'm confident that one of those 5 guys will be a Buffalo Bill.
Prefer one of the edges. Actually, prefer one of each.
Selfishly, I want one of each.
Yes.
But if you had to pick one of those 5, who's your ad?
Justin Houston. That's what I'm adding. If I had to pick one, just because he's still got, he's played, like I said, he's played in a lot of different schemes. He had 9.5 sacks still last year with the Ravens. Like, he's still got some juice left, and I like his size, I think, more than I like Melvin Ingram's size. I think Justin Houston's a very unique player. Like, he's still able to get around guys around the outside, but he's got size. So, like, he's a very cool physical sort of makeup. So I'm going Justin Houston.
And let us know in the comment section who you would go after. We got a couple people voting for Poona. I'm gonna go edge as well. Claude Puig comes in and says Yannick Ngakoue. I don't care. Yannick or Houston, one of those two, I would be ecstatic. Those are the 2 guys I think gives you the most pass rush pop. Ingram would be fine, but I definitely would prefer to spend the money, go get a Yannick, go get a Justin Houston. And the reason why I'm picking edge over defensive tackle is because I do think that there are some bargain bin IDLs out there. Jaleel Johnson, Mike Pennell. So like you can maybe go double dip and get your edge and get your DT. And I would much rather have Yannick or Houston and like Pennell, Jaleel Johnson, more so than like Poona Ford and like Robert Quinn. Like that, the first one intrigues me more than the second one. And most of the votes that are coming in the comment section appear to be for Poona Ford. And then there's one saying trade for Fletcher Cox. I don't know how realistic that one is. And a lot of people saying Vincent Taylor, the former Buffalo Bill, bring him back.
Hey, people loved him.
So that'll be interesting.
Was it like 2-3 years ago? We were like trying to trade, like we wanted to trade for Yannick. It was like, was he worth a first rounder to trade?
Yeah,
it was
him and Daniil Hunter, I think. All right, to close out the show here, I want to have a little bit of fun. My jabroni of the week is anyone who wants to grade a draft after it happens. So like my jabroni is anyone who wants to put a letter next to teams' draft grades. I think it's the stupidest thing ever. People say, oh, you got to wait 3 years to grade a draft class. To me, I think you got to wait 4 years to grade a draft class because that's how long the contract is of everybody outside of the first round. So I want to have a little fun right now, and I want to look back at the 2019 NFL draft, and we're going to grade Brandon Bean's 2019 NFL draft here. So I'm going to walk through the picks here, and then I want you guys in the comment section to provide your grade. We'll talk about what our grade is for the 2019 NFL draft, and we will go from there. With the first pick in the top 10, the Buffalo Bills selected Ed Oliver. In the second round, the Buffalo Bills selected Cody Ford. In the third round, the Buffalo Bills double dipped. They selected Devin Singletary, and then they traded back up for Dawson Knox. In the fifth round, they selected Voshan Joseph. In the sixth round, Jaquan Johnson. In the seventh round, Daryl Johnson. And also in the seventh round, Tommy Sweeney. All around, there are some key players in there, but there are now a lot of guys from that draft class who are no longer on the roster or never really contributed in a significant manner. Got some grades coming in. Spud says B-. Ralph Wilson Sr. says C. Jason Suggs says C. Bills Mafia STF, B-. Claude Puig, B. Roy Collins, C-. Dave Ware, Dirty Jersey, C+. Jason Scruggs, no letter, just dumpster fire. Just the word dumpster fire. John Herring, that's a C. El Shar comes in, says a C. How would you grade Brandon Bean's 2019 NFL draft?
I think I'm kind of with Bills Mafia STF. I think it's a B minus, and I put it more on. I'm not willing to go down as far as to say it's in the C range, but I don't
Yeah.
think it was elite by any means. Right? You had a top 10 pick, and you have Ed Oliver, who at this point doesn't look like he's going to be back. Maybe with the Bills beyond this year, he's been a solid player for them. He's had some pretty nice flashes, but he's needed a lot of help around him, I think, to really get the most out of him. You look at a guy like Cody Ford, they traded up for him. Probably one of the worst, if not the worst, draft picks of Brandon Beane's tenure here. So that brings the whole kind of class down. But then you kind of look at guys like Devin Singletary, Dawson Knox. And Devin Singletary, for what he was for the Bills and where you drafted him, I think you got a lot of good value out of him. Dawson Knox in the third is everything we hoped he would become. I think, given realistic expectations, like I think he exceeded, expectations given his lack of experience, and obviously got the big contract. And there's still maybe better football ahead for Dawson Knox as well. Voshon Joseph, wash, obviously. Jaquan Johnson, solid special teamer for the Bills, played out his whole contract, really good special teamer. Dale Johnson, special teamer, still in the league. And then Tommy Sweeney, last of the 7th round picks, is what it was, right? He was on the team for several years, didn't really contribute much. To me, it's a B minus. The Cody Ford pick really standing out is what kind of brings the whole thing down. And then probably hoping to get a little bit more out of Ed Oliver, but I'm not going to be mad about picks like Voshon Joseph not working out or Tommy Sweeney when those are late round picks anyway. So I'll give it a B minus.
You're more generous than me. I went with a C plus. And
we're close. We're close.
Yeah. At the end of the day, what really stood out to me is there's a real possibility that only one of these players is a second contract player. And to me, that's an absolute failure. Now, the two things that really drive down this class are Cody Ford being an absolute bust. Even his rookie year at right tackle, it was a mess. Then they kicked him into guard, and it was a mess. Devin, and then Voshon Joseph, I don't even think he made the team coming out of camp, right? Like he was just straight wet cut.
Yep.
Jaquan Johnson did what he did for 4 years as a special teamer, backup safety. Tommy Sweeney, same. Daryl Johnson could just never crack the defensive line rotation. I don't think Brandon Beane gets a pass for this, but we traded Daryl Johnson for a 6th round pick, which became Christian Benford. So that was nice. It's a C plus because Devin Singletary contributed in a meaningful way for 4 years. The argument could be made that, he sort of maybe held the Bills offense back from pursuing better running backs. That could be an argument you could make too. Dawson Knox gets the second big contract. He's the crown jewel sort of this draft class. And it all hinges on Ed Oliver. Like it really, really does hinge on Ed Oliver. The 3 defensive tackles drafted after him, Christian Wilkins, Chris Jones, and Justin Simmons. That stinks.
I could have used you not saying that.
That really, it stings. But I will say that I would be willing a year from now to change my grade from a C plus to maybe a B if Ed Oliver finally plays to his potential and the Buffalo Bills sign him to an extension, which is not something that any fan wants to hear right now. So if Ed Oliver delivers in his contract year, signs an extension, and continues to deliver as a 3 tech, if Ed Oliver and Dawson Knox are 2 second contract players from this draft class, I think you'd be able to give it a B, especially considering some of the other guys were 4-year contributors along the way, but definitely not Brandon Beane's finest hour. And that's funny because we talk about reacting right away. I would have given this thing an A plus the day after the draft. I loved this draft class when it was as it was happening.
Well, let me run this by you, right? Like you say Ed Oliver, if he balls out, like, is it not somewhat similar to Tremaine Edmonds? Like if you're going to pay out Ed Oliver, like for one I'm not saying Tremaine only had one good year, but like if he has like a above average year in 2023, is that enough really to give him a new contract?
Oh,
Like to give him
I wouldn't do it. I'm saying if it happens in some
yeah.
fantasy land, like or
like he would have to
if it
absolutely
was,
ball out.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. Like I'm laying out what it would take for me to increase my draft grade.
Yeah,
I
okay,
personally,
that's fair.
if I was general manager of the Buffalo Bills, I would have tried my darndest to trade out Oliver this offseason. I would just use him this offseason and then let him walk and then hope to get a compensatory pick. I mentioned this on shows. I feel like when Ed Oliver is playing his best football, he's a difference maker. But I also believe it's too sporadic. He's oft injured. And I also believe he is completely dependent on players around him to be successful. I don't think he makes the players around him successful like a Christian Wilkins does, like a Chris Jones does, like a Jeffrey Simmons does, the three guys that went after him. So those are my beefs with Ed Oliver, and I would not give him a second contract. All right, Dave, that should just about wrap it up for tonight. I think this might be our longest show of the offseason. We've been trying to keep it a little bit more curt this offseason, but a lot to digest the Monday after the NFL draft. I know we were a little worried if we'd be able to start on time because Cover One Roundup went a full 2 hours. So 4 hours worth of Buffalo Bills talk from Cover One this evening.
And 14 hours of live draft coverage over this past weekend, plus pre-shows and post-shows. Africa, like tons of coverage. Was just a blast. It was tiring, so it'd be good to get a little bit of a rest this week. So
yeah, I think Spud was like, Judge sounds like a librarian tonight. Yeah, new father, so I think I'm going on 3 hours of sleep last night, and we had all of that draft coverage. So I'm definitely a little bit more mellowed out. I didn't have any sort of tirade on that Canadian influencer who made the Buffalo Bills third round pick.
That's the jabroni. That's the jabroni.
That's the jabroni of the week.
The jabroni of the week is really who made the decision to let him do it, right? Like, I mean,
people were saying that was a Matt Pagula decision. I don't know, like
that. The jabroni is really the decision maker. The influencer is a jabroni on his own. But a
Dolphins fan. Dude is a Dolphins fan.
It doesn't make any sense.
Between a Dolphins fan getting to make the Bills pick and embarrassing us like that, rocking that Bills jersey, and the Miami Dolphins getting the cast of Ted Lasso to make one of their picks, I was not thrilled. I was not thrilled. Speaking of draft coverage, like I said, we had 20 plus hours of draft coverage this weekend, and there was other great draft coverage around YouTube as well. Joe Marino, Kyle Krabs, Brett Coleman was live the entire draft. So many people are like live now the entire draft. Saturday, like I mentioned, Saturday I was on dad duty. I had a newborn baby the whole day, so I wasn't like on YouTube or anything like that. I was just watching the traditional coverage. Shout out to ESPN. Like they were even talking about this. They've pivoted back to more of a traditional day 3 broadcast. They brought on Matt Miller, formerly of the Bleacher Report, now works for ESPN Plus. They, for the most part, were going prospect by prospect, showing video, breaking them down, talking about the draft classes, interviewing GMs, things like that. It wasn't big picture. They were very prospect specific. So I appreciate ESPN for that. They did skip Justin Shorter, which pissed me off. I think they maybe just didn't have Justin Shorter prepared. They just skipped him. So I do appreciate ESPN for that. I'm really looking for like ESPN is sitting on the hidden gem. My favorite draft analyst is Jordan Reed. He was doing ESPN radio. I love Matt Miller, and I'm happy for him. They already announced that he's going to be on the coverage next year as well. I'm really looking forward to my guy, former Draft Network guy, Jordan Reed, getting his shot on television as well, because the dude's electric. He's one of my favorite evaluators. And shame on NFL Network. I didn't watch, but apparently somebody told me they went 15 plus minutes without covering a single prospect, and it was just the people at the table playing with puppies. And apparently at some point in time, like a dog pissed on Daniel Jeremiah. That's what they get. Riveting. That's what they get.
Riveting.
It's riveting stuff. But yeah, so shout out to ESPN. Like ESPN, a lot of people like to mock ESPN, talk about like all the different shout out to ESPN for at least understanding where people were at pivoting back to that more traditional coverage, the coverage that people wanted. So I appreciate them for that. And we appreciate you guys in the comment section for the full 2 hours tonight. We were above 200 at one point. You guys were like 400, 500, 600, 700 strong with us during the draft. I think you just said that the day one coverage went above 6K. So we really appreciate that. I do have 2 puppies that I could bring on if I wanted to at any point. So maybe I can bring on the puppies next week. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much. Seriously, like, would not be the same show without you guys in the comment section sort of guiding us and driving us and giving us your input. We used to do it, just the 2 of us talking into a microphone, having that sort of isolated conversation. The comment section really does bring the show to life. It adds a different element, and we're truly thankful for everything that you guys bring us here in the comment section.
100% agree. It really is something we've really grown to just, have as part of our show. Like, it's now just naturally part of the show. So we got to keep it up, and you guys are awesome. We appreciate it so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, much appreciated. And until next time, well, first of all, smash that like before you head out. We could really appreciate that. Helps with the algorithm. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!